Click record from the first moment you're sitting down.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you can do whatever you want. I'll just edit it out.
Well, that's
But
good.
you edited it.
Well, I'm here with my friend Jonah, aka KJ52, and he has 20 things that he's been talking to me about that he wished he knew when he was 20 years old. And this first one is really about female versus male, the differences. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the first thing was I grew up in a very liberal home, so my parents were artists. So I was a very kind of hippie existence. I called my parents by their first names growing up. So
What were their first names?
Richard and Lana, thank you very much.
So it was
it was odd for me to know, like, that was not a normal thing.
Yeah.
So my background was a very liberal, very, I just had a different upbringing.
Yeah.
So when it came to male versus female relationships, I was very, for lack of a term, I was very liberal. So I always looked at, before I was a believer, I always looked at the Bible or church as very patriarchal, as very oppressive to women.
Yeah.
That was one big reason why I did not want to become a Christian, because I felt like here's an outdated thought process.
Right.
That men and women should be equal, that there should be equal rights, and that this idea that the man is the head of the household is like from some 50s sitcom and things like that. So when I surrendered my life to Christ, I remember struggling with this because I would always hear women, wives, submit to your husbands.
Yeah.
And I thought, that just seems like a good way to like take advantage of women under the eyes of this like Bible thing that you can smack them with. And especially in my 20s, going from my teenage years, getting saved, coming into my 20s, looking for that person that I wanted to spend my life with. And I struggled with the idea of that. But I also struggled with the idea that how to rectify these poor habits that I had picked up as a male, coming from a hip-hop mindset where it is very male-driven and it's very...
Tell me about that. What do you say habits? What are a couple things?
Just the idea
Not that you're proud of it, but what?
Well, just the idea that it's my way or the highway, that I know best, that as a man... it's funny how liberal my mind was. I was still very misogynistic. I looked at women as something to be conquered, as something to add to, almost like your trophy wall. So it's interesting how as much as I tried to be liberal, the reality was my own sinful nature wanted me to be the very things that I was against. So all this, I had this baggage going into my marriage, going into my dating life as a believer. And so I struggled with this, and just really struggled with the verse in the Bible where it says, wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, have reverence for them. This is what bothered me, as the weaker vessel. And I thought, is this God's way of saying that women are weaker, that men are better, that men are stronger, that we secretly kind of got it going on a little bit better than these girls do? And these are all the things that reverberate in my mind. And I thought, how do I rectify this verse as a believer? How do I explain this to my liberal, super like homies that already think I've lost my mind and I've joined a cult because I'm now a Christian? And I struggled with this until I heard a guy break down that verse in a way that made more sense to me. The irony is that, growing up, I was really into like hip hop fashion and gear and clothing. Like I felt like you could redefine yourself by how you dress, especially coming up poor.
Yeah.
And,
well, I think that's somewhat true, but no.
Well, I think the hip hop aesthetic says you can have nothing, but you can still have something. The way you wear your shoes, the way you wear your jeans, things like that. And so this guy, he started talking about jeans, and so it immediately got my attention. And he compared fabric, and I understood fabric because I love gear. So long story short, he said if you take two types of fabric, you take jeans or you take silk. And this is coming from a guy who had a pair of silk MC Hammer pants. And I'm totally not embarrassed to say that. Had a pair of silk MC Hammer pants. Only had one pair. My cousin gave them to me. I never gave them back.
Oh, could you do the dance?
I could totally. I was killing it on the typewriter stuff. But anyway, I'll never forget. I took those silk pants and I threw them in the washing machine.
Oh, sorry.
Not even pants. Yeah, it was
flashbacks.
I threw them in the washing machine and I thought, oh, you just wash them like jeans, right? And I pulled them out, and it was like someone had just like wrapped up toilet paper and balled it up. And I spent the rest of the day trying to iron them. You don't iron silk on top of that. So I was so ready to go to school that day and just kill it. and I looked ridiculous because not only do I have these like MC Hammer harem pants where the crotch is like down to my knees,
Iron marks.
there's iron marks in them. They're all patchy now, but I'm like, I swear they're silk. Feel them. The point is that I never wore silk, so it wasn't my go-to fabric. Okay, and I was a jeans guy. I was an after wash jeans with like the rip in the knee. That was my thing, and. When he started talking about the difference between jeans and silk, all of a sudden the light bulb came on. The light bulb was that he said women, in context, now he's speaking in generalities,
right.
and I want to be very careful to say that too, is that
right.
I want to speak in generalities when it comes to female versus male, because obviously we know that
there's unique situations.
Yeah, and none of us like to be boxed in.
Right.
But there's a problem when we also don't recognize the fact that there are generalities about us.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, he said women are like silk because it is a fabric that is not as physically strong
right.
as in comparison to a pair of jeans. But the care that is used for silk, actually, if you would compare jeans to silk, one is of a higher value. One takes more time in its making of it. Right. It has to be sought out. Obviously, silkworms make silk. You know what I'm saying? Like jeans are made for a totally different purpose. Jeans were made initially for cowboys that had to ride the range and wear pants that could handle ruggedness.
Yeah.
And this whole concept began to like reverberate in my head. The concept of what is true masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? That at our core essence, we as men, we just like Scripture said in the Garden of Eden, that you will toil the soil. You will work.
Right.
You are put on this earth to be a provider and to be, the brunt of the world hitting you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And he began to just kind of illustrate this difference, that silk versus jeans, the care of it is completely different. I could throw my jeans in the washing machine. They could get banged around. I could pull them out. Totally good to go.
Yep.
I can't throw silk. It takes a different concept. And so what I've spent my first couple years of marriage was constantly bumping my head as a young married man in my 20s, essentially treating my wife the way I would have treated my male friends, speaking to her in ways...
Treating that silk the way you
yeah.
treat your jeans.
I mean, you know that the way guys talk to each other
right.
is different than the way girls talk to each other, even just down to the verbiage. I mean, they talk about how I observed my sons when they play when they were little. It was like half the words out of their mouth were just, you know what I mean? Like there wasn't even
single syllables, or
a lot of grunts, a lot of explosions, and and observing like my neighbors' little girls, how they were just so much more verbal,
right?
And they had so much more expressive and so much more emotive, and I didn't get that, and I spent a lot of my early years in my 20s. As a young married man, in a lot of arguments, in a lot of fights, a lot of things that I said that I was very embarrassed to look back on and go, this is how I treated my wife. But the reality was that verse where it talks about to regard her as the weaker sex does not mean inferior. That's what I had to understand. Right. It didn't mean inferior. It just meant tinsellarily the strength of her fabric is different than mine.
Yeah, trying to tell people, as a pastor, weddings and things, you're reading that and people are out there. You can be, I think society gets too politically correct sometimes because we're trying to, you can be equal but different.
Absolutely.
God, I believe God made us equal but different, just as you're saying. He made us to toil the land. Women, you look in generalities we talk about, we can say that most men, when they are born, physically, they're stronger.
Physically, that's absolutely.
Most women, when they're born, they have a spirit, a nurturing spirit, and that's the way God had made. They're better at compassion in general. They're better at when somebody's falling down, talking to them, and keeping. I think you're right on with what you're saying. So you heard this story of the silk and the jeans. You're 20 some years old, and you're having these issues. How do I treat my wife? What have you done to change that, and how has that affected your relationship with your wife?
Honestly, I didn't even realize I was doing it. I realized that I had picked up good and bad traits from my mom, from my dad, and my stepfather. And so these three units that were in my life growing up, I would find myself becoming the good and the bad of both of them. I should say all three of them. So there was times where I would deal with my wife the way my stepfather dealt with me. I would deal with my wife the way my dad dealt with me, or the way my mom dealt with me, or the way that they didn't deal with each other. You know what I'm saying? So there was so many things that I had to just, one, acknowledge. This is the other problem, is that I'm a very driven person, and I don't run from conflict. I like to run to conflict.
Yep.
And that understanding is that I was like, I enjoyed arguing in a sad, twisted sense, but it's probably the reason why I wanted to be a lawyer as a kid, and I was like the number one in speech and debate at my high school and things like that. So like, I had to realize that not every argument was there to be won. That admitting you're sorry does not equate to weakness. That was a big problem with me. That saying I'm sorry, that even saying I'm sorry where I felt like I didn't do anything wrong, this is still an issue I struggle with. That sorry to her means a different thing than me saying sorry. Me saying sorry is like, I'm a weak person. I've lost the fight. Again, going probably back to my male nature. But I heard this analogy too that kind of put that in perspective. He talked about these two people going down a mountain where they were on this path. And this path where there's only one person can fit on this path. Yeah. And the only way for both people to get to their destination is somebody had to lie down and the other person had to walk across them. That otherwise most people just would stand there and argue about, no, you lay down, you lay down, you lay down. And in marriage or dating or any sort of relationship, there comes a time where you are at a stalemate and someone has to lay their pride down in order for you to both get to your destination. Yeah. And that is something that I've just had to grow in, that understanding that she's not me and I'm not her, and we're in a problem when we try to make men women and women men. Now, we all have overlaps. There are things that is...
personalities.
Exactly. But I just had a lot to grow in, and I still have to say I have a lot to grow in. But one thing I really wish I knew in my 20s is that men and women are not the same. Yeah. And that's not a bad thing. That's a thing to be celebrated. That's right. That's a thing that can accent each other. Even the way that this guy gave me an analogy of how the way men and women's brains are wired. That women are like spaghetti, and that their brains work like spaghetti, where everything is interacted, everything is interconnected. They can connect with every area. That if this bad thing happened at work, it's affecting this thing over here. Whereas men are very much like waffles. We compartmentalize
the space. Yeah.
The space.
That's good.
So I can compartmentalize how I'm feeling about this to get this other task done. And she doesn't. She doesn't think that way. That's awesome. And it's wrong for me to make her think that way. So that's awesome. Anyway, that's
20 things you wish you knew at 20. Females and males are different, and that's all right. It might not be politically correct, but it's biblically correct. When God said that he gave man a helpmate, it wasn't to lord over. It was so that we could come together and make each other better. So you guys go out, break out in your study groups, whatever you're doing. Glad you watched this. Take some time. Talk about it. You don't have to agree with everything we said, right?
I barely agree with myself.
Come on. We're trying to just stimulate some conversation with y'all. So have a good one.